11 is what I'm marking as the opening. So let's convene and call to order. We do a roll call. So about Ashley,
Present.
Peggy,
Here.
Tony,
Present.
Ricardo, here. Thank you. All right, so having begun, have roll call. Anything on the agenda, I think we've already, these we vet way beforehand with each other, so no public input. And therefore, we can motion to go into closed session for the purpose of conducting the appeal hearings.
I'll make the motion to go to closed session.
Thank you. So called by Tony, seconded by?
I'll second.
Ashley?
Sorry.
By Ashley. And all those in favors, let's say yea. Yes?
Aye.
Aye? No one opposed? Okay. We'll convene as normal upstairs then, and get us going. We have a night. Fellow board members, I'll entertain a motion to close, what is it? To? Yes. Thank you. That's good enough.
I'll move to come out of closed session.
I'll second.
Thank you, Tony and Ashley. Given that we have considered
We vote on it.
oh, we should vote? You want to vote? Okay. All those in favor of coming out of closed session, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you. All right. Just want to thank everybody, support staff, everybody involved, Alex, and the fellow residents. We're doing our best, and today we'll be moving kind of quickly on, I'll name a case, I'll entertain a motion, get it seconded, and I'll ask for any discussion, and then we'll vote. The pattern that you will see, just for simplicity's sake, given the number of cases, is that the person making the motion is likely to say, will support a motion to support the findings letter. And I introduce it like this because the ordinance gives us very few choices as to how to act on the appeals. We can either support the letter sent by the chief, we can also move to not support it. We can say no finding, and then it has stipulations. We can remand it, that is, send it for it to be investigated again, or we can accept a mediation. There have been no mediations on any of these cases, so that's discarded. And there probably won't be a motion for no findings disposition. So you will find that most of the motions will be to support the letter, and as people vote yes or no, then we might end up with ties or not, but you will see then that the pattern is there, and we're doing it for simplicity's sake, but everybody, of course, has their own vote as to how they feel about particular cases. The last thing I want to share with you is that the number of cases that we're processing seems to be quite large. These cases are mostly all related to traffic-related matters, and then a few that are catch-ups. And lastly, so that I don't forget, our next meeting, Carla, our next regular meeting is on September 27th, but our next hearing date is August 9th, a month from right now. And so we'll be doing another one of these long hauls, but as we work on these cases, we're doing our best to both catch up, but also give each case a fair hearing. Okay, any additions to those overall comments, anybody? Okay, so I will now entertain a motion on Appeal 2020-34.
And I move that we sustain the chief's findings.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any discussion as to this case before you vote?
I think just overall with these, the finding in this particular appeal was of insufficient evidence. The majority of my votes will be in the fact that the insufficient evidence finding, I think, is problematic based on the investigation we've seen in some of these cases, and also some of the editorializing in the disposition directed towards the complainant is where some of my vote will come with these types of, with these particular findings of insufficient evidence.
Okay, so on the matter of Appeal 2020-34, the motion is to support the chief's finding letter. Roll call, I guess we have to do them as roll call. Okay,
Mr. Allegretti?
No.
Mr. Diaz?
no?
Ms. Patton?
Yes.
Ms. Withers? No. Noes have it.
Okay, we have voted to not accept the chief's letter.
Point of order.
Yes,
I remember we talked about this. If you are voting to not, to sustain it was not passed.
that's right. So now we need a motion to not sustain it, that's right. Thank you.
Motion to not sustain the chief's letter in Appeal 20-34.
I need a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any other deliberation? Okay, let's have a vote on not sustaining the chief's letter. Roll call.
Mr. Allegretti?
Yes.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes?
Ms. Patton?
No.
Ms. Withers? Yes.
Thank you. We have a resolution as to 2020-34. We're moving on to 2020-35. Do I hear a motion?
I'll make a motion to sustain the chief's findings letter.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion before you vote?
I guess the only general comment I'd like to make, which really applies to most of these, is that I concur with the observations you made, Tony, but also I wanted to add that I think complainants bear some responsibility in offering evidence they have to provide support for their complaint, and that didn't happen in any of these cases. And so insufficient evidence, I think, we could have had sufficient evidence had the complainant offered evidence that they had in their possession. The only other general comment I want to make, which again applies to most, is that I am sometimes upholding findings because I think they are responses that were reasonable in light of circumstances. These were times, the first weeks of COVID, and I think there were circumstances that were unusual at best. So those are sort of two general comments that will apply to this appeal as well as most of the others.
Thank you.
So I seconded.
Thank you, Peggy. The motion is to sustain the chief's findings letter. Any other discussion? Then let's have a vote. Roll call.
Mr. Diaz?
No?
Ms. Patton?
Yes.
Ms. Withers?
No.
Mr. Allegretti?
No.
Thank you. So the motion does not pass. Do I hear another motion?
Make a motion to not sustain the chief's findings in Appeal 20-35.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes.
Ms. Patton?
No.
Ms. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Allegretti?
Yes.
There are sufficient votes to pass the not sustaining the chief's letter. 2020-40. Do I hear a motion?
Make a motion to sustain the chief's findings in AP 20-40.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Roll call. Or any comments? I want to just clarify for people to just look it up if you have a chance. Policy 309 of the police basically specifies when what officers are to do when they get called for an emergency call to go across town. I don't think it's improper for me to say that a lot of these cases have to do with the discretion that the officer might have when they do get a call, and at what point can officers disregard some traffic rules. And so policy 309 is the one that refers to this. As a generality, then I say officers have some discretion as to when not to obey all traffic signals and whatever. And the rule says that they should turn on their sirens or their lights to signal that they have an emergency situation that they're going to. I don't know if that was enough.
Just to piggyback on that, Ricardo, the policy also states the state law, which if anyone listening is interested, it's cited in the policy, but it's 625 ILCS 5/11-205.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's not a long read.
Yeah, and it's good learning for people, for everyone to know how do we allow our officers to take the situation. So the motion on 2020-40 is to sustain the chief's findings, and we have a second. Any other deliberation? Okay, so let's have a roll call.
Ms. Patton?
Yes?
Ms. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Allegretti?
Yes.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes. Thank you. 2020-41 is the next one on our list.
And I move to sustain the chief's findings.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. Questions, comments? No? Then roll call.
Ms. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Allegretti?
No.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes.
Ms. Patton?
Yes?
Thank you. The motion passes to agree with the chief's findings letter on 41. 2020-44, do I hear a motion?
I'll make a motion to not sustain the chief's findings letter for this one.
Okay, motion to not sustain. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion here? Okay. Then the motion is to not sustain the chief's letter. Please have a roll call so we can vote.
Mr. Allegretti?
Yes.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes.
Ms. Patton?
No?
Ms. Withers?
Yes.
Thank you. I believe that we have passing of not sustaining the chief's letter. Thank you. That was
44.
It was 44.
44. We got 47 on this page also. Motion on 2020-47.
I'd make a motion to support the chief's findings in AP 20-47.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Peggy. Any discussion? All right. Oh, yes?
You know, some of these, there's, we saw some evidence in the presentation of the officers responding to a particular call. I think in the interest of not splitting hairs about some of that, even though I think there may be some argument as to whether or not it was an emergency or not, you know, that'll reflect in my vote.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Then let's vote. Roll call on 2020-47.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes.
Ms. Patton?
Yes?
Ms. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Allegretti?
Yes.
Thank you. 47 is in support of the chief's findings letter. 48.
I move that we sustain the chief's findings in 2048.
Okay, second? By, thank you, Ashley. Any comments? Okay, then let's have a vote on supporting the chief's findings letter. Roll call?
Ms. Patton?
Yes.
Ms. Withers?
No.
Mr. Allegretti?
No.
Mr. Diaz?
No. Do I hear an alternate motion?
Make a motion to not support the chief's findings in AP 20-48.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote?
Ms. Patton?
No.
Ms. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Allegretti?
Yes.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes. That's 3 votes for not supporting the chief's letter. Number 49.
I'll make a motion to support the chief's findings letter in AP 20-49.
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, then roll call on 49 to support the chief's letter.
Ms. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Allegretti?
Yes.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes.
Ms. Patton?
Yes.
We have supported the chief's letter unanimously on 49. Do I hear a motion on number 50?
I'd make a motion in AP 20-50 to remand this case back to the chief of police for further investigation.
I'll second.
Thank you. Are there any comments on 50? Let me remind the audience that remanding this letter remands the case for an investigation by the chief of police. That is, we do not find that the previous investigation was sufficient for us to make a decision, and therefore this goes back to the chiefs to select who will do a further investigation. Should their investigation letter, their findings letter, when it goes back to the complainant or to the person appealing, if they decide that they're not satisfied with that investigation, they can appeal that and it would come back to us. Should they be satisfied with the investigation, then that would close the matter, since in that case they wouldn't appeal. So the motion is to remand number 2020-50 for a new investigation. It's been moved and seconded. So a roll call vote. Oh, any other comments? Okay,
No.
roll call vote, please.
Mr. Allegretti?
Yes.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes.
Ms. Patton?
Yes.
Ms. Withers?
Yes.
So we have decided that for 2020-50 that we are asking for a new investigation by the chief's purview. Number 20-51.
I move we sustain the chief's findings in 20-51.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any comments? Then let us do a roll call vote.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes.
Ms. Patton?
Yes.
Ms. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Allegretti?
No.
Oh, I lost count. Can you remind me?
3-1.
3-1.
3-1 to support the chief's findings letter. Okay, then that's what we are. Thank you. 20-13, a motion for that, please.
I'll make a motion to sustain the chief's findings letter for AP 20-13.
This, I think, just, I'd second, but if, just for discussion, this is regarding notarization of a complaint, which is no longer a requirement under the ordinance, and it's also not allowed under state law. So going forward, a notarization is not required, which,
That's right, so you can just, you still sign your complaint as you turn it in, but it does not have to be notarized. Thank you for that clarification. The motion has been put forward to accept the findings letter, and it's been seconded. Any other comments? Then let's do a roll call.
Ms. Patton?
Yes?
Ms. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Allegretti?
no.
Mr. Diaz?
No. We have a split vote, 2-2. Given that the first motion did not carry, can I hear an alternate motion, and then we can discuss before we vote?
I'll make a motion to not support the chief's findings in AP 2020-13.
Okay? Is there a second?
A second.
Okay. So now we're at the point where we have two people that would support the chief's letter, two people that did not support letter. The motion is to not support it. So let's have a little bit of discussion of why you have stated your position.
I mean, I understand that notarization is no longer required, but when this was filed April 5th, 2020, it was, at least that was the practice that we were following in filing complaints.
It was, but I don't, the reason for my vote was that it should not have been required, based under the ordinance and state law. So that's why I'm voting no.
But why was it the practice? I mean, I was on CPRB and I wasn't really even following it back then, but if it was the practice, why was it followed? Because
It may
for
have just-
precedent, I mean, for a number of years that had been the practice, or,
I don't know if
Oh.
I have a good answer for that.
but,
Because I
I
wasn't,
personally see it as the requirement to have something notarized as an additional barrier that might discourage somebody to not make a complaint because notarization is not readily accessible to
It
the
re-
general public, or the knowledge of where to do that or how to do that might be lacking.
it also requires an ID to be presented, which someone may not have. So there's some public policy reasons as well.
I guess, as you know, I mean, I've been here, I lived through this as member of the board, and we eventually came to the conclusion that the policy was wrong, that state law was not requiring us to do notarization, and that the practice of other cities also said as much. This particular case also has, for me, coming back to the letter, was very conflictive to me. Staff were instructed to get things notarized, but admittedly, in the letter, I think that the policy was, if I can remember, they so stated as a policy failure. So I would like to sustain that is true. There was a policy failure, but the result of the situation and then eventually the letter was not satisfactory to me. So I'd like to support the truth value of it, but the practice and the result was what I cannot support. So,
I guess I just see it coming down to staff were just doing what they were told to do, and that we eventually came around to do the right thing, which is no longer requiring it, but at the time, these
Yeah.
were staff who were just doing what they were told to do.
Sure, and I guess I don't think the vote should be taken as a condemnation of what was done by staff. It was just, I think there was a lot of miscommunication and maybe misunderstanding, and once it got clarified, we got on the right side of it, but, it was still, shouldn't have been done. Again, not really a value judgment there.
okay, does anybody have any other comments on this before we vote on the motion to not sustain the letter? Okay, the motion is to not sustain the letter from the chief. May I have a roll call?
Ms. Patton?
No.
Ms. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Allegretti?
Yes.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes. So we have an agreement that we did not support the chief's letter. It's hard, I know, but here we are. We're moving on to 2020-33.
I move we sustain AP 2033.
A second.
Thank you. Any comments on this? Some related matters, but the practice is to vote on each one individually.
This one was regarding notarization. It was a little different in that it was the direction of a sworn officer as to what a notary should do. And I found some issues with the way it was handled. So that'll drive my vote.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, then let's have a roll call vote.
Ms. Withers?
No.
Mr. Allegretti?
No.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes.
Ms. Patton?
No.
The vote then is to not sustain the chief's letter. Thank you.
Or the vote to sustain it failed.
Didn't fail.
So I
Yeah,
would
yeah.
like to,
Oh,
I would
okay,
like
thank
to
you.
resubmit a second motion to not sustain
Thank you very
AP
much. I
2033.
Left the gap.
I'll second.
Thank you. So the present vote is to not sustain the chief's letter. Any comments? Okay, let's vote.
Ms. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Allegretti?
Yes.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes.
Ms. Patton?
Yes. To not sustain.
Thank you, yes. That was 33. We are moving on to 42, 2020-42.
I'll make a motion to sustain the chief's findings letter for AP 20-42.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any comments? And let's take a vote. Roll call, please.
Mr. Allegretti?
No.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes.
Ms. Patton?
Yes.
Ms. Withers?
No.
Motion has failed. Can I have an alternate motion?
Do we want to discuss before?
We'll have the
Oh,
motion
sorry.
and discuss.
Motion to not support the chief's findings in 20-42.
Yes. A second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Now discussion on not supporting the chief's letter.
I think this is similar issue to 20-13, in my mind, that it,
I have a question of whether or not it was appropriate to require the notarization to begin with.
right, I think it's the same arguments that we've heard before. The other cities weren't doing it. It's a barrier to people who don't have access to particular resources, and wasn't required, even though it had been the policy. Again, you know, this is not
In the
casting.
practice, not the policy.
In the practice, excuse me. It's not casting aspersions on staff, but upon review, I don't think it should have been done.
And I agree the right thing happened, but I think if it was the practice until it was officially, until the city staff were told, you no longer need to do this. As long as they were following through, and I understand emails were sent about, we can't process this until we get notarization, because that's still our practice, that they were just following what at the time was their practice. So you're right, it's very much like before, but it was staff doing what they were told to do. And I'm glad we turned it around, but that wasn't the case in April 2020.
Yeah. My addition to that is I'd like to come back to, so what happened to the complaint? That is, there was a content on the complaint, and, you know, that someone was putting a complaint about something. Some rules may not be followed. You could easily argue that we don't all follow rules all the time, but what gets me is we have to eliminate errors and we have to compensate for each other. And we've already had instances in which something was accepted with a signature only without notarization, and that came later, so why here we don't? So as I think more about it, I think to be consistent, then I just want to see the output that people are free to complain whenever they want to, and we should intake it with minimal rules. So that's my comment. Anybody else? Okay. The motion is to not sustain the chief's letter. We have a vote. Roll call.
Mr. Allegretti?
Yes.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes.
Ms. Patton?
No,
Ms. Withers?
Yes.
We have 3 yeses on not supporting the chief's letter. Thank you. We are moving on to 43.
Make a motion to not support the chief's letter in AP 20-43.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
So the motion is to not sustain the chief's letter. Are there any comments, clarifications?
I think this is a mirror of what we just discussed in 42. I believe the complaint was submitted over email, but given, if we're given the timing of this was early COVID, this would have been, I think, an accommodation that should have been accepted, and so I think, and again, given all the other reasons why notarization wasn't required, I think it should not be supported. Or, sorry,
It's okay.
not support the
sustain.
findings, sorry.
not sustain, yeah.
Okay.
And I guess the only thing to that is because it was COVID, I think there were a lot of not moving outside your box because people were working remotely and kind of coming up with procedures that they never had to come up with before and not actually meeting in person. So I think it's understandable that people were following past practice and not trying some new steps.
Right.
So,
Yeah, so for me, this case both has that part and then the leeway of the content of the case of what was in the complaint. And it's hard. We normally will vote on an appeal for all parts, but sometimes I find myself saying yes to one side and saying no to the other. So this one was a little bit harder for me, even though it seems like so overlapping with the previous ones. So any other comments? Okay, so we are voting to not support the chief's letter. It's been
Mr. Diaz?
To not support. No.
Ms. Patton?
no,
Ms. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Allegretti?
Yes.
If I'm reading this correctly, we have 2 to support and 2 to not support. So since that was the first motion, I am ready to take an alternate motion.
I will move that we sustain the chief's findings in AP 2043.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion on supporting the chief's letter? Okay. Then let's do a roll call vote and deal with it.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes.
Ms. Patton?
Yes,
Ms. Withers?
No.
Mr. Allegretti?
No.
So this motion does not pass either. We can resolve it. Let me see, how many more do we have? 2, 4,
4 after
2,
this
4 after this one.
You want to
Okay.
come back to it?
Yeah, I want to come back to it once we go through the rest. So let us keep this one in suspense. We know that both motions did not pass. Let's take 39.
I move that we sustain AP 2039.
A second?
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion to sustain the chief's letter on 39. Any discussion? Okay. hear a vote.
Ms. Patton?
Yes?
Ms. Withers?
No.
Mr. Allegretti?
No.
Mr. Diaz?
No. Do I hear an alternate motion for 39?
Well, we're okay,
It carried.
yeah.
Oh,
Or,
that
sorry,
carried.
no, I'm sorry,
No,
you're
no,
right.
we
No,
d-
you're right,
we
you're right.
rejected to
Yes.
supporting the letter, so I need an alternate motion.
I will make the motion to not sustain the chief's findings letter in AP 20-39.
Second.
In a second, okay. Any further discussion? Let's vote. Roll call.
Ms. Patton?
No?
Ms. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Allegretti?
Yes.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes. So we have voted to not support the chief's letter, probably on the same grounds as before. So let's move on to 27.
I will make the motion to not sustain the chief's findings letter in AP 20-27.
Second.
Okay, any comments on 27 about not sustaining the chief's letter? Okay, roll call.
Ms. Patton?
No?
Ms. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Allegretti?
Yes.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes. We have agreement or majority for not sustaining the chief's letter on 27. Let's do 31.
Make a motion to not sustain the chief's findings in AP 20-31.
I'll second.
Okay, any comments? Roll call vote.
Ms. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Allegretti?
Yes.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes.
Ms. Patton?
No?
We have not, we have a majority vote for not sustaining the letter from the chief. 31.
That was 31.
That was 31. We're on 32.
We're on 32.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
I will make a motion to not support the chief's findings letter for AP 20-32.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Let's have a roll call vote.
Mr. Allegretti?
Yes.
Mr. Diaz?
Yes.
Ms. Patton?
No?
Ms. Withers?
Yes.
We have a majority vote for not supporting the chief's letter for 32. Just in case anybody's keeping track, the last three votes actually had a component at a previous discussion or a previous hearing, and we try to separate the issues of the issues within the complaint so that we could vote on those parts separately. We have left to go back on 43. We had a tie vote twice on supporting and not supporting. So before that I ask for another motion, since we've exhausted well, no, we could also have a motion to remand if we wanted to. But any further discussion so that we can get to another vote before we have another motion on it. Remind you that we should be not specific to respect privacy, but at least, since we've all been in deliberation, to help each other decide, since we didn't know each other's vote was going to come to this.
I thought I had a copy of the complaint forms that were being used at the time, but my understanding is the complaint forms that the public was given, you know, on the website or whatever, did require notarization. But I don't have a copy of that. Is that true?
The form does have the notary seal and signature bracket. It's just a question of whether that should have been there at all.
Right, and I guess I'm just saying, you know, first month of, I mean, maybe it wouldn't have made a difference. I mean, this just happens to be the first couple weeks after COVID. To ask staff to suddenly stop complying with a form that they'd been following pretty, to the letter, because they realized it really was an obstacle to submitting complaints, which we all agree and eventually made that choice. But ask staff to suddenly change their practice, especially a couple weeks into COVID when they weren't around to have discussions about this, and certainly the city council didn't instruct them to do that. It seems an unreasonable expectation.
I think looking back at that too, this was made the very end of April of 2020. At this point, we'd have a little over a month of COVID and the city building being shut down. And understanding that if the city building is shut down, I know we've seen some other complaints kind of regarding access to the building and how is one supposed to submit a complaint if the building is shut down without having access to a notary. I think a little over a month is plenty of time to say, hey, why don't we go ahead and just accept these via email for now? And we'll look at the policy a little later date when we can all address that or something like that. There's a little over a month, I feel like, gave people plenty of opportunity to start looking at certain things and figuring out accommodations to be made given the circumstances.
This was also a time, and this is kind of outside of what we discussed, but the executive orders from the governor loosened the requirements for actually having a notary. And the only reason I know this is because of my work, but you could do a notary over video, and that had not been allowed before. That obviously wasn't done here, but there was some accommodation for this given the circumstances with the pandemic. So, I think that, the pandemic can be played both ways as far as, well, we shouldn't change anything because everything is getting really out of control, but also, we should change things because we have to adapt to the current situation, so.
Well, add another factor during that time, I don't think we had a defined HRO line of authority, and so if anything was to be submitted, and I think we saw it in other cases, it got stuck on that inbox, sometimes without the police knowing that there was a complaint there. I want to fall back to again, if there is a complaint, whether it's good times or bad times, it ought to be considered. And that is really, it's a hard call to continue using rules, to not come up with rules, because ultimately we do need the public's contribution. And a complaint is a suggestion box, if you will. And when there's no one at the inbox, it's really hard to say, well, I never got in because of administrative lack of presence. So I think that played much into it because the rules were hard to implement when there was nobody there. It is surprising that at the receipt station, and this is to clarify for the public, you no longer have to turn in your complaint at the police station. You can call our HRO, and you can start it over the phone, but eventually come and sign it and deal directly with her. You don't have to deal with the police when you put in a complaint. And if you're not satisfied with the results of the complaint is where you appeal and you come before this body to explain why you don't agree with how the police investigated or came to a conclusion. So there was a lot of extenuation during that period, and I wish I could be consistent on all of them, but it's really hard for me to impose so many constraints on situations that have passed. And we have become better because of new rules, but it's hard to say that all rules applied during this time. Can I ask for someone to move in either direction and see if anybody's vote has changed?
I'll move to not support the finding in AP 20-43.
Okay, a motion to not support the findings letter on 43.
I'll second.
has been seconded. And so let me ask for, well, comments, a roll call vote then.
Mr. Diaz?
I'm going to abstain on this one because I can't make up my mind as to how to be consistent.
Ms. Patton?
No.
Ms. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Allegretti?
Yes.
So that means we have 2 votes to not support the chief's findings letter and 1 vote against that. So that means this passes as a not sustain the chief's letter. Is that everybody's understanding?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Then that means we have gone through 18 cases tonight and have diverged several times. But I believe that as I think of the summary, the learnings from this is that it's very hard to implement rules without some flexibility. On the other hand, applying all rules with some flexibility is not only for residents, but also for police in their conduct. And we're talking about the smaller matters, whether it's, a crime is a crime no matter who commits it, but breaking the law is not always the same kind of crime. I used to say this in immigration quite a bit. Coming through is a civil violation. A ticket is usually a civil violation, right? It's minor. We're not going to prosecute and put somebody in jail over it. I think that today's lesson is that when we want to give leeway, we have to take a lot of items into consideration, but not close the door because sometimes the circumstances are such. So, any other?
And I would just like to add that I think one thing I learned looking through these cases is just how important it is to do your due diligence and investigations and making sure that you have all the pertinent information in order to move forward. So I would hope that the city continues to do that or starts doing that going forward. And I think we've brought up a lot of questions regarding whether or not video footage is a sufficient, quote, firsthand account of witnessing an action. And I think if the department is willing to take action upon a citizen, they should utilize it to take action upon themselves as well in the same manner. So just would like to add that.
Can I ask you to unpack that a little bit? What does that mean to take action against or video?
Yeah, so, obviously, I think the police department uses video footage or stills from camera footage to catch people committing crimes throughout our city pretty frequently. I think we see things posted on Facebook from stores, so-and-so, this person was spotted using a credit card, and we use that as evidence to hopefully find those people. If there is video evidence that shows an officer committing some sort of act that is against policy, then I feel like that should be utilized in the same manner. And rather than saying, oh, this person didn't witness this firsthand, we're not going to use it, to discipline that officer, I would disagree with that.
Consistency in
If we're willing to use it to prosecute and citizens, I feel like that should be used in the same manner to discipline officers.
Yeah. Well, we've come a long way. We now have video cameras, with each officer and on each officer, and it's helped us make decisions. But I think there are decisions yet to be made as to what counts, and we'll be coming back to that topic probably at a general meeting. So, any other? Then thank you very much, everybody. Have a great night. We'll see you in a month for another hearing. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Motion to close.
So moved?
Thank you. And
Second.
seconded, and by acclamation, everybody's
Aye.
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 Thank you very much.